Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a word that you're all familiar with, a word that has been used very popularly, and you find it very popularly in many of the industries, particularly the technology industry. A word that is ambiguous, and what we're trying to do is try to put some focus to what this word basically means. Okay, before I start, I want to make a clear differentiation between the word innovation for the purpose of starting up a new company versus innovation in an existing company. Okay, here I'm going to be talking about something that I hope that we are able to put more focus to in the future, which is you will recognize an established company. That company is experiencing some growth challenges, and we want to see how can we make this company more innovative. So let's talk with a quick pop quiz. So you have 4 companies on your screen, and what you need to do is to tell me what's common between the 4 companies.
All are dying.
All are declining. 2 of those are dead. 2 of those are having severe problems. The two on the left, which is Blockbuster and Netscape, they died. One of them, the business model just totally collapsed. Netflix totally destroyed the company. Netscape, Microsoft did a fantastic job basically killing the company. Nokia has become a follower over the past 4 years. It has experienced severe competition from Apple, from Research in Motion, and a lot of bets are now put in to see how the new operating system will take hold. But Nokia, its stock price has declined severely. And the last one, Taha, if you remember that, right? It was one of the main leaders in Egypt in the food and beverages industry. Now it's not any longer. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Intel, Pepsi, 3M, Amazon.com. What's common with those?
Innovation.
They're all leaders. Right? They're all leaders. Whether it's a company that started more or less the microprocessor business and has continued to grow and continued to innovate, and now they're trying to shift their business into more on the software side, or whether you're talking about Pepsi, who actually emerged after Coca-Cola but has done a fantastic job in terms of introducing new products into the market. For example, the Diet Pepsi was Pepsi. They're the one who actually introduced that product first, and then Coca-Cola followed. 3M, of course, they're well known to be the leaders of innovation. They do all kinds of stuff. They have excellent relationships with their suppliers, and they're very good at collaboration. Amazon.com has done a fantastic job also in terms of growth. They started as a book, a place, a portal to buy books. Now they sell everything, and now they're trying to compete with Apple with the new Kindle. Okay, so all these companies, they have grown and they have continued to innovate. Finally, I just want one last question about what's common about those 4 companies. Apple, IBM, systems, Lacoste.
Innovation.
Change your business model.
Exactly. Changing their business model. Reinventing themselves. Okay? These were leaders, and they declined at a certain time, and they had to reinvent themselves and become more innovative. Whether it was introducing new products or having a new business model, whether it was again products going from products to services and or changing its business model, Lacoste, it was a pure marketing strategy, pure marketing innovation. And Giza Systems, again, they did a lot of restructuring inside, and they started to focus on new markets. What I'm trying to say here is that when you talk about the word innovation, it doesn't mean that you're coming up with new products. It means a lot of things. It means processes, it means products, it means marketing, it means business models, and so forth. So the main message here from the 3 previous slides is that you need to innovate. Otherwise, you're going to die. That's a quote from Peters. And if we classify the type of innovations that these companies have looked into, we can classify them into either a business model innovation or a technology innovation. And it's good to do this kind of differentiation so kind of opens up the way that you think about it. And just to let you know that this presentation, I'm not going to be saying anything new. All the things that I'm going to be saying today you've already heard before, but I'm just going to try to put it in a little bit more context. So when you're talking about business model innovation, you need to have an understanding of what you are developing. So it's the what question, it's the how question, how are you going to deliver it, and it's the to whom question, who are you going to deliver these products to. On the other hand, technology innovation, again, depends on what kind of products or services are you going to be delivering as a company. How are you going to deliver that product? Is the process innovation something that helps me as a company, or does it also have some kind of impact on the customer? And finally, what kind of enabling technologies are out there that can help me be more innovative? For example, the use of information technology is an example. So this type of classification is very useful, and what I would like to do in the next few slides, I want to talk about each one of them very briefly, so that we can get a little bit more insight about it. So I call those the six levers of innovation. The first one is talking about the business model innovation category. So again, the value proposition is about what is being sold. The supply chain is how you create it and how you deliver it, and the target customer, and then to whom are you are targeting. So trying to answer the what question, value proposition of the company, the kind of new products that they introduce, what kind of enhancements that they do to the current products. Very good examples to this is IBM. When they start to see a decline in their revenue because of their sole focus on products, and now they have a very heavy shift. They have had a very heavy shift towards services, and if you look at their income statement, you will find that a big chunk of their revenue is actually coming from services. Amazon, on the other hand, has grown again significantly over the past years. They have repeatedly changed the business model. They have repeatedly tried to identify gaps in the market and try to fill it. And they have introduced both business models, like in terms of doing market innovation, in terms of introducing new products, becoming a mall instead of just selling books. But they're also looking into marketing hardware. Like for example, their Kindle that they developed a few years back, and now they're introducing a new version, which they so say will be competing with iPad, primarily because of its price. And not only that, Amazon is leveraging its main core competence, which is content, to be used in these Kindles. Okay, similar to what Apple has done when they brought iTunes around their iPod and made iPod so popular. Okay. Supply chain, actually, again, when I talk about supply chain, I'm talking about the way that certain products are developed, and how they reach the market, and how certain decisions are made to them. You can now think about it as being as an organizational thing, about how you do partnership and how you do operations inside the company. Let me give you 3 examples. Okay? Vodafone Egypt. Here I'm talking about Vodafone Egypt. Vodafone Egypt, they've come to realize over the past few months that there is something different that they can do in terms of coming up with new ideas. Anybody know? Not necessarily does Vodafone Egypt have to develop or come up with these new ideas from inside. Why can't they try to outsource that, or allow other small companies to develop these ideas, and then Vodafone can invest in these companies? Maybe they can eventually acquire them, I don't know, right? But they would certainly establish some kind of partnership. And that's why Vodafone has created a venture capital arm inside the company, right? This is a very good model, and basically they are investing in a number of companies, one of which, for example, is Neolink, the one that tells you, how the traffic is going. And another one they've been looking into Summary, it's another company, and so forth. So the idea here is that how can you come up with new ideas without actually having the burden of expenses and costs and so forth. Toyota had also a very good supplier relationship. That just tells you the importance of the kind of intimate relationship between a company and another. And here, I want to stress something which Dr. Ashraf mentioned, which is the word collaboration. So collaboration is a very important concept. It's very simple, but it's extremely important. The idea of not reinventing the wheel, the idea of trying to see the advantages or the good things about other companies and try to create partnerships. And finally, Microsoft, and this is a good example that talks about the kind of partnership that Microsoft has. Is that when Microsoft decided to go into the gaming industry and they developed their Xbox, they understood that the fate of their Xbox would lie upon how many games are in the market. If there are no games in the market, or not enough games in the market, nobody will buy the Xbox. And therefore, Microsoft had a mandate to collaborate with the people who are developing these games in a very efficient way. So again, this is going to a popular concept which is called complementary assets. You have a core product, which is the console in the case of Microsoft, but you have to make sure that there are the complementary assets around it, so that core product can be marketed and can be adopted very quickly in the market. Okay. Target customer, again, simple concept, but again very powerful. And the two examples that I have here is like Quaker. Quaker, they developed a number of things, one of which are the nutritional bars. They were initially targeting customers who were athletes, and then they realized that if they do some rebranding, repackaging, remarketing in a certain way, they can basically target women. Okay, which they did, and it was a huge hit. Okay, so again, it just explains to you that it's the same product. You just package it in a different way to target a new customer. Dockers did the same thing. Dockers, they developed a bunch of it's a retail store. They sell pants, shirts, and so forth. So they try to target again men who are unorthodox, low maintenance. They didn't really care about whether they're going to pants that in the morning or whatever. So they started in Homa to develop products for that segment of men. So again, it's all about how you target certain products to your customer. Now going into the second category, which is the technology side. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory. New products, enhancements of current products. McDonald's did a fantastic job in that when they introduced a lot of their low oil products. Mobile phones are also I would say an example, and the iPad when it was introduced. So again, introducing new products is a clear way of innovating or making your company more innovative. The other thing that I also want to talk about is the process technologies. So when you're talking about and whether this process technology impacts the company in terms of helping it to cut costs, or in terms of allowing or having an impact on customers, either way we call that process technologies, and in that way you're doing process innovation. So an example to that is a very old example. For example, Ford, when he developed the assembly line, so that immediately increased the throughput of cars that are being produced, right? And it certainly helped with cutting costs. Another example is, for example, what Dell was able to do when they found that there's a gap in terms of what kind of computers that people can buy. They allowed people to choose and pick and choose, right? And they had to have a process that enabled people to pick and choose, and a process for them to be able to assemble these components in a very efficient way. Okay? So that kind of a process innovation helped both sides, the company and the customer. Okay? So that's, again, this is something also to keep in mind and understand that again, the process kind of innovation into the process can help you and the customer. Finally, the last kind of innovation that we can talk about is what we call the enabling technologies, right? Any kind of technology that helps you do things better, basically. Okay, helps you do things better. And a good example of that is information technology, the internet in general. So, for example, the internet was an enabling technology to eBay, right? The internet was an enabling technology to Amazon. The information technology was an enabling technology for Egypt Air to be more efficient, right? When Egypt Air wanted to join, for example, Star Alliance a few years back, well, there were certain requirements that Egypt Air had to fulfill, right? One of these requirements is to ensure that the process is in a certain way. And in order to make it more efficient, they had to automate the process, and therefore they had to use some information technology infrastructure to do that. Okay? So enabling technologies is a thing, or it's a concept which helps companies become more innovative. Okay? And they usually come hand to hand. So although I categorize business model innovation on my left hand, technology innovation on my right hand, typically when you look at a company that is innovative, they typically do both. So an example to that would be, for example, Dell. The business model was very different, which allowed, as I just explained, it allowed people to pick and choose what they wanted inside their computer. But they also had to, but in order to do that, they had to innovate their supply chain. Same thing for eBay. They had a very powerful business model, right, which allowed people to basically sell and buy things from each other, but they had to have a very strong enabling technology infrastructure in order to make that very efficient. Apple is a terrific example. What made Apple so great is not just about its products, right? It's not just about the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, right? But it's about how the company was able to create a number of things around these different products. It's about how they created the iTunes around the iPod. It's about the bold decision of Steve Jobs when he decided to go into the retail business, right? And then people start saying that this guy is absurd, right? So this is a business model decision, right? And it is coupled with new products. So both of them, both of them together, they made Apple so innovative, and they become one of the highest value companies in the world, right? So if I look at the technology innovations inside the company and the business innovations inside the company, I can form some kind of a matrix like this, right? Which basically categorizes different products and services inside the company as ones that are incremental, okay, and you go up to the extreme of being radical, which is basically fundamentally different. And in the middle, we call those as being semi-radical, right? Now, this is not an academic exercise to start classifying products as being radical or incremental or semi-radical. This is about how a company needs to look at its portfolio, its innovation portfolio. If you see a company where all its products are incremental, then you raise a red flag right away. If you see a company that where all its products, where a company, they're doing, all their products are based on pure creativity without capturing the value, like what Steve Jobs did 30 years ago, and that's why they had to let him go, that's another red flag. So there must be some kind of balance that you see inside these companies, right? To have both the incremental component and other products that can truly create this kind of differentiation between you and your competition. Okay? And the way that you manage incremental products is different than the way that you manage radical products. And the way that you set your strategy, that I want 5 years down the road to be this, right, will dictate how your portfolio is going to look like inside. And that will also, and when you know that, this will dictate how you are going to reward and incent people inside your company. Okay, so I'll talk about this in a few slides. So the best way to think about that is that if you have the business model levers, value proposition, value chain, target customer, and then you have the 3 levers of technology levers, which are the products, services, process, and enabling technologies, you can classify products and services inside your company based on 4 categories. Okay, based on 4 categories. And this is the way that people define it. The definition is nice, but that's not really the main thing. The main thing here is how can you create a good mix between these different products inside the company? How can you guarantee that you can sustain the kind of growth that you want when you have this portfolio of products together? One last thing that I want to point out is that most of these innovations, right, can be also classified as being competence enhancing versus competence destructing or destroying your competence. Okay. Basically, what this means is that when you come up with a new innovation, are you building on your core competence or not? Are you using the things that you are good at, or are you not? So, for example, if you look at the evolution of, for example, the iPod to iPhone to the iPad, you see some kind of a connection between these 3 different products. They are all capitalizing on the same thing. The same thing that Apple is so good at. Okay? Whether it's how sleek the design is, how user-friendly the device is, and so forth. Or you can have the case of a total competence-destroying innovation, for example, going from a slide ruler to a calculator. Okay? So the main message here is that when you look at the number of different companies that are out there, right, and you try to assess why these companies have become so innovative, right, most of these, the big chunk of these companies, they will find that their products and services go back to their core competence. They go back to what they're very good at. Okay? So there's a company, for example, that I don't want to name here in Egypt, right? That it's an IT company, it's a big IT company that has diversified so widely, right, into areas from real estate to glass production to insurance, right? That's a very heavy diversification. That can cause the company to lose focus, right? And it's arguable, maybe they're doing this for shareholders because of the shareholders they're interested, for the stock price, for example, to go up. But again, it's a question about how sustainable that kind of strategy is. Okay, actually I'm going to go through, I think I'm going to actually skip this because this is a little bit more, it's academic, but it's also going to give a kind of like a practical sense to it. I was going to talk about technology S-curves and how as a company you need to kind of understand how they evolve, right? Timing of entry. Okay, we can talk about these things in the break. Timing of entry, when you decide what kind of questions are you going to ask yourself in order to make a decision to enter the market. And I give this example in 4 years ago when Naif Sawiris, he came out and he said, I don't think that Egyptians would need 3G networks. I don't think that Egyptians need these high-speed, the kind of infrastructure to support high speeds and to convey videos and so forth, right? And he decided not to invest. Well, he was wrong, right? He was wrong, and they came out a year later after they started to see that there's market share being lost, and they started to invest in their infrastructure again, and they started basically saying that they are the leaders of 3G networks. Okay? So that was a decision that the Naif Sawiris had to make. should he invest in 3D networks or should he not? Okay, and there are, and I wish I had more time. There were certain criteria, certain set of questions that he would have, that he could have looked at, right? That perhaps would have given him some good insight as whether what kind of decision he would make. There's just one slide that I want to talk about here before I leave those three parts together, which is a concept called network of externalities. Okay. The concept is very simple, and this is something that I always try to say to some of these companies that I talk to, right? It's not only about your product that you should be concerned about. It's what is around that product. I repeat this one again and again and again. It's not what's around that product. It's about what kind of complementary goods can you have around your product. Okay. The idea of how can you increase the adoption of your product? How can you increase your customer base through other ways other than your core product? And I gave the example of Microsoft when they have the Xbox, and they had to ensure that they had a decent number of gaming developers around them to make this Xbox so popular. Right? Same thing that exactly what Apple did in terms of their technological capabilities. Its organizational capabilities means is that how good are you as a company in terms of the learning process? Do you learn from each other? Do companies talk to you? Do different business units talk to each other or not? Right? If an employee leaves the company, how can you ensure some kind of a process so that this information can be kept in the company? Current success, by the way, right, is an obstacle. The more the company is successful, the more they are resilient against changing. Okay, so that's a notion that I think it's good to keep in mind. And most importantly, it's the top management vision. The leaders of the companies, they have to understand the importance of innovation. They need to show that, they need to ensure that the kind of culture is there inside the organization that promotes innovation. Similarly, for external factors, we all know that the different industry structures, understanding competition, and I want to stress on the fourth point here, which is the rate of technological change. Okay, and basically, this is an important issue because when we're talking about a sector like what we're in right now, which is the IT sector, right? Technology life cycles are usually very short. Okay, so you need to be very. So this dictates when you enter the market, what kind of products are you going to develop, these types of decisions. So, and that's where the S curves that I have to skip over come very handy. So it's the balance between these internal and external factors together, and the balance between offering radical products versus others that are incremental, that is extreme, that is very, very important. And by the way, this is one of the things that is used as a criterion to assess organizations as to how innovative they are. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Is how good of a mix do they have for their innovation portfolio? And the process by which any company needs to think about in terms of how innovative I am and what should I do typically takes 3 stages. To assess the status quo, what you have right now, to start identifying what you need to develop, and then the actual execution or the actual implementation phase. When you assess, you need to understand the level of funding that you have inside the company. You need to understand the 2 things that we talked about previously, which is the technological innovation versus the business model innovation. What do you have currently? So you're assessing the status quo. And what kind of levers are you currently using in your company? Are you in your company focusing more towards making a better product, or are you as a company are focusing more into trying to take that product and try to, for example, market it in a different way, trying to change the business model in your company. Is there a focus here? Are you overusing these levers, or are you underusing these levers? These are questions. These are very important questions, by the way. Very important questions that companies need to answer. And you need to understand whether you, as a company, do you have a winning strategy or do you have a no-losing strategy? Why? Why is that so important? Because it will basically dictate what kind of products, the mindset, the kind of services that you're developing, and so forth. Okay? Once you assess that, then you need to have a very good understanding of the kind of mix, which is called the innovation portfolio mix, that does a very good balance between these different components, right? And then finally, the actual execution phase, where strategy needs to always be communicated with employees. I'll give you an example. That was one of the companies that I consulted to a few months back. Their main problem was that the CEO or one of the top people in the company, they were basically making decisions and they were not conveying these type of decisions down. People at the bottom level, they lost motivation. They don't know where the company is going. They had no understanding of that, right? And that was a clear communication problem gap that we had. Okay, so it's a very simple. These things are very intuitive, by the way. But if you actually look into whether they're being applied or done or not, you'll be surprised. So this is very important. And the other thing is that for leadership to understand, if I'm going to be more innovative, who am I benefiting? Who am I benefiting? You can benefit many people. The obvious thing is benefiting the consumer. That's clear. But you can also benefit your own employees. Okay? Creating a culture inside the company where you are, as a company, more innovative, that would probably increase the likelihood, right, that you'll get good people into your company. They would like to join your company. Look at Google, right? So that is very important, right? And of course, you have the investors side of the story. The other thing that is also very important, again, that a company needs to look at is how they come up with new ideas. Okay? How they come up with new ideas. I'm putting here five different mechanisms or 5 different methodologies by which companies can come up with new ideas. And one of the things that I've heard is that my company does not bring that we are not able to generate enough good ideas. I'm putting here 5 different ways, and I'm putting them by the order of easiness. Okay, so this is, in my opinion, is the easiest way to come up with good ideas inside the company, and this is perhaps the most difficult way. Okay, so the first one is structured idea management. It's basically a very simple process, right, comprised of 7 steps that you basically start filtering out good ideas based on certain criteria. Okay, some of these steps they relate to they include brainstorming sessions between different people. But the important thing is that you keep filtering. It's like the funnel diagram of any startup or any kind of coming up with a good idea, right? So you have the filtering process. This kind of a process can be taught. I can tell you that it can be taught. Okay, and it can yield good results. The buyer utility map. This is one that I've used myself, right? And I can tell you that it basically allows the company to think about what is good for the customer in terms of from a product point of view, and what kind of goodness does it provide as a customer experience. Okay, two different things. Okay, and the kind of matrix that you will develop here actually allows you to come up with many very good ideas. Well, that's one of my favorites. The 6 thinking paths by Ed Bono. right? Again, it's another one that allows you to make certain decisions. People that wear different hats, they prioritize, helps you prioritize decisions in a certain way. It's another very structured way of thinking. Okay? Instead of getting a group of 6 or 7 people together in a group and just brainstorming in an ad hoc way, this is giving you a very nice structured way of thinking. And there's nothing wrong with that. Mind mapping is another way of doing it, which is basically to visualize how different ideas, how they are linked to each other, and it also helps you prioritize your ideas, like which ones are more valuable, which ones are easier to do, and so forth. Okay? So again, if you're interested in those, I can talk to you a little bit more of that in the break. The last one actually is a very interesting concept, right? But people usually don't like to use. It's called the theory of inventive problem solving. And the story behind it is actually very interesting. After World War II, بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية, right? Germany was occupied by Russia. Okay? And what happened was that there was a Russian scientist who basically was able to get access to all the patents, German patents. So what he did is that he had like a few million German patents, right? And basically he started to classify these different patents and to cluster patents together that followed the same line of thought as how they came up with this idea. Okay? And he was able, by doing this kind of classification, this kind of clustering, right, he was able to come up with 40 different ways that can solve any problem in the world. Okay? So any problem in the world can be solved using only these 40. There are only 40 different ways to solve it. And let me give you an example. Again, it's a very simple example, right? Very simple, but if you think about it, it's extremely powerful. One of these 40 concepts is called physical contradiction. Okay? Physical contradiction. معناها إيه؟ معناها إن you have something that is بشكل معين at one point in time, and then another point in time بشكل ثاني خالص. Okay? So the example that I always like to use is that, when you have a professor who بيحاول يشاور على السبورة, right? He used to use a very long stick زمان, صح? Right? Now that, for the purpose of مشاورة, that was good. But for the purpose of taking this stick with him back to the office بتاعه, that wasn't very convenient. So the idea was the idea was that in class, I would like to have something which is very long, عشان أقدر أشاور بيها. Let's say when I go back to my office, I would like something which is very short. So they came up with a, okay? This is a very simple concept, right? This is very powerful. زي بالظبط كده في الأوتيلات, when you find, instead of having a bed نايم بالشكل ده, when you use it and then it goes up like that. Have you ever seen that? This is called physical contradiction. The BlackBerry, my torch, this is physical contradiction. It's one looks one way in a certain time, looks another way, different time. Okay? These are very simple concepts, and they typically are applied when you are focusing on product innovation, just that you know. Yeah, it's not very good for business model innovation, but it's very excellent in product innovation. Right. And what I want to do now, and then I want to tell you that this is the way that I typically do things. How do you measure innovation? Okay? And the way that I like to think about it is that you have an innovation value chain inside your company. And your objective is very clear. I want to understand that if my goals as a company are بشكل فلاني, I want to understand what kind of inputs will allow me to achieve my output. Okay? Very simple concept. So you have an input, you have a process, and you have an output. Okay? We call this the need measure. This is what you have قبل ما أي حاجة تحصل. And you have a real-time measure, right? Which is the actual real-time, the actual thing that's taking place, the actual process that's taking place. And then you have the lagging measure, which is the byproduct of what you've done. Okay? And what I want to understand how can my outputs, whether my outputs are operational KPIs or financial KPIs, how are they impact? What kind of inputs will impact these operational KPIs or professional KPIs عشان أقدر أحسنها. So basically what we do is that we identify what are these different inputs. This is a bit, I put everything here, but you find these things based on what companies have and what are their priorities. But in reality, what you do is that you look at a company, and you look at what kind of inputs, what does the company have. So the company has tangible resources, software, infrastructure. It has intangible resources, talent, motivation, culture, knowledge. It has the existing strategy بتاعت الشركة أنا عايز أروح فين؟ What are my priorities? And it has the external networks. Do I, as a company, do I collaborate well with other companies? ولا I'm not collaborating and أنا شغال لوحدي. That is the status quo. Once I understand the status quo, then I have the second step, which is the processes. In terms of how am I able to do an ideation process? How do I come up with an idea generation? How do I generate ideas? How do I do that? How am I able to track and understand how these ideas, how they evolve? Do they eventually get marketed, or do they die in the middle? I want to know how efficient my project execution is. Okay, these are all processes. And finally, I want to understand whether I have a balanced innovation portfolio. I want to track. I want to be able to track whether I'm able to get that good mix between different products, whether they are incremental or radical, in a way that I can measure. والoutputs في الآخر زي ما قلت لكم they can either be things that are intangible, like technology leadership. Part of it is intangible. Other things are tangible. Project completion, new product introduction, fast, and market leadership. These are the different outputs that I would like to enhance. I want to reach these outputs. And what you do is that you have your inputs, processes, outputs, and you start doing linkages between from the inputs to the outputs through a certain process, right? This is that is called the innovation value chain, right? And basically what you do is that if you find that there's an input that feeds into multiple outputs, and these outputs you care about, right? Then this is an input that you would like to focus on, right? If there are things, by the way, that apply all over, like culture, for example. Culture. You can argue that this is linked to all the outputs, okay? But there are other inputs that are a little bit more focused, right? So when we do this, then you're able to identify which of the inputs do I need to improve in order to achieve my goals. Okay. Let me just go through. I'm going to go through this very quickly. By the way, what the examples that I have here. Okay. There are actually 6. That's fine. These are the 7 rules that the company needs to always keep in mind. And given that we talked about all of the FED, this is kind of the bottom line. Okay, so the bottom line is that we're talking about leadership, we're talking about the culture, the business mentality inside the company, the way that the way that you match innovation with strategy, how you capture value, resistance to change, networks, and metrics and rewards. Okay, I'm not going to go through each one of them just for the interest of time, but let me tell you this. In the last couple of years, where I talked with companies and I consulted with companies, I can tell you that the number 1, 2, 3 top barriers to innovation inside Egypt, I can tell you it's number 1 is the culture. The people, and by the way, this is linked to leadership part of it. It's the culture inside the company. It's the sense of ownership of employees. To give them the flexibility or the freedom to express ideas, and also, by the way, to create a structure. You have to give a structure for them to express ideas. For example, Vodafone had what they call the idea bank. The other companies that are using certain portals inside the company so that people can deposit their ideas, they can look at ideas, they can change ideas. Culture is very important. The other thing is leadership. Okay? Leadership and the way that they communicate with people inside. That is something that Barco a lot. When you talk to people who are at the top level, mid level, and low level, you see actually very interesting stories there. You'll find actually there's quite a bit of discrepancy. Okay? It's very, very important. And the other thing is that I want to stress on, in the companies when they put rewards programs and incentive programs, you have to be very careful about this. You need to make sure that you're rewarding the right behavior. And if somebody comes up with an idea that is incremental, حاجة كده صغيرة, and you reward him, that is basically telling him and telling his colleagues that this is acceptable. Okay? And also you need to have some kind, and you need one of the things, and again, and this is not academic, this is kind of what used to happen. Although the culture of it's okay to make a mistake. The culture of when you're done with a project, you do a post-mortem analysis. You understand what did you do wrong, and so that you're able to not make the same mistakes again. Okay. So those are the main things. These are the main messages that I want to give you. And finally, I want to talk to you about the framework. Like if you as a company, you want to assess your innovation, right? How do you do it? Okay? How can you do it? And I did a bit of research to test the data in Qatar, okay? And I came to the conclusion that, in my opinion, the best way to do it is to use 80 Kearney's. If you have ever heard of 80 Kearney, is top 10 management firms in the world. They have what they call the House of Innovation platform, okay? And the House of Innovation platform, what it does, it assesses organizations for their innovative capabilities, and they try to answer the following questions. How can I secure my company's future? How can I sustain my margins? How can I ensure that my best customers will still be my best customers 2, 3, or 5 years down the road? How can I deliver new customers and markets for my products and services as quickly as possible? How can I attract and retain qualified employees? How can I finance my growth? Okay. Sounds familiar? What they did, in Oma, A.T. Kearney did a lot of consulting, and they started clustering together, and they started looking at the top companies, and they started to cluster, why have these companies become successful? What have they done? And they put it together in a platform, right, which has become very popular, and what you do, in Agenta, you assess the company on 4 different levels. You look at the strategy of the company, innovation strategy. You look at the organizational structure inside the company, the culture. You look at the life cycle, innovation life cycle processes, how the ideation process, how do you come up with ideas, how do you come up with new products and processes, how do you launch your product, and when. And finally, they look at what we call the enabling factors, the innovation enabling factors. Okay, knowledge management, HR, IT infrastructure, and so forth. And from those 4 factors, they try to understand how will this impact the innovation results. And the innovation results, في جزء منها financial, وفي جزء منها that is not financial. Okay? And they do a radar chart. انت فين? How do you compare, how do you benchmark yourself against the average of your sector? How do you compare against the top 10% of your sector? This is very powerful, right? This is very powerful information that you would like. And you can benchmark yourself, right? You can benchmark yourself against whatever sector, whatever region. Yeah, somebody would tell me, you know what, I don't feel comfortable comparing myself to Western Europe. Well, you can still compare yourself to Eastern Europe, although I can dispute that. You can pick different regions, and this platform has been applied to 5,000 businesses. So they have a database of 5,000 businesses, different number of different sectors, one of which is IT, right? And that you can do that. And these are some of the aggregate results that maybe you would be interested. These are some of the results that when they surveyed European companies, businesses that are in the IT sector, and that have been they're about 10 to 15 years old. Vision of innovation is the score out of 10. 1 to 10. Vision of innovation, more or less, they scored 6. Characteristics of innovation strategy, and then the thing goes on. Okay? Strategy, organization, culture. كل واحدة من دول, by the way, it has its own thing. Okay? So I'm just showing you the aggregate. So it's actually a very powerful tool, right? Innovation life cycle processes, full assessment, innovation enablers. Again, they try to understand. And finally, how does this impact the innovation results in SMEs? We're talking about today financials, like things like gross income, income from sales, income from new sales, income from old sales, right? Gross and operational profit, and so on. Okay? This is a sample of a flow, usually that companies use. This is our own flow, actually, at Innovety, where we basically typically spend a month during the assessment phase, a month during the strategy and roadmap and development phase, and then we spend typically 7 months in what we call the execution and validation phase. Each one of them, there are key activities that we perform related to innovation management. Here are some of the tools that we use, and here are the kind of deliverables. And the deliverables are typically dependent on the company. So again, some people they like to see instant. This is a bad thing. The instant results from the kind of assessment. You have to talk to them and say, this is not going to happen, and so forth, right? Or people who have a little bit more vision and they're okay to, they understand that this is very important to them and they're willing to invest and they see the results a year later. Okay? So the value proposition for this is actually very powerful. It's very powerful for companies, especially for SMEs, right? It's excellent for financial actors like investors. It allows them to actually, it's like a due diligence concept, right? If you want to understand whether the company is doing well or bad, this is a good way to assess companies. And it is also good for policymakers, right? Because again, if you're able, and this is something that we've been doing, by the way. When you talk about an innovation index, for example, for a particular sector, innovation index for Egypt, right? It's basically the aggregate responses of like this. And if you're interested, you can talk more about it in the breakdown. Okay? So you can do it at the firm level, sectoral level, or country level. You can assess innovation at those 3 different levels. Okay? I just want to take 2 quick slides about Innovety since I'm here. Okay? So in our team, we like to think of ourselves as a boutique consulting firm. I like to use the word boutique. Okay? We don't claim to do everything, right? But we claim to have focus in the areas of innovation management, organizational learning, and operational finance. Those are the 3 areas that we have most expertise in. And we serve both established organizations and startups. Okay? So for example, we did training for about 60 technology startups, right? Mentorship, some of them we actually have equity stakes in. But we also do a lot of, we serve larger organizations, hands-on training in the areas of innovation management, organizational learning, and doing root cause analysis, which actually is interesting. Okay? So thank you very much for listening.
Very good, thank you. How do you foster innovation? Because that means education, thinking, research.
Did you see the very nice pyramid that Dr. Ashraf showed? Where he talked about the pyramid, you had the fundamentals, and then you had fundamentals are what? You talk about education in schools. You're basically talking about the whole ecosystem. Like if you want to do this properly, you have to look at the whole ecosystem. You have to do it properly. You have stakeholders, educational stakeholders. You have to have some time. You need to have support from government. You need for companies actually to understand the importance of this. And one of the things that I'm proposing, for example, here, is that if a company is interested in exploring this further, one thing that they could do is that they can create an innovation officer or innovation manager inside their company. Okay, as an example, where that person would be responsible for overlooking how different units they communicate to each other, what kind to assess their organization every once in a while and see how they are improving. So if you're talking about fostering innovation inside the company, right? You need to then I'll talk about culture and so forth. But talking about at at the national level, then you need to have a look at the ecosystem as a whole. Okay. So for example, like this is one of the things when I was working at T for 8 months, right? One of the really good things was that we wanted to create a repository for innovation, an innovation repository. And basically what it is that it is whether it's a platform or it is some kind of an entity where all people, they come together. The way to exchange ideas. If I want, for example, to find a solution to one of my problems, this is where I would look into. If somebody who wants to start a new company and I don't know where to start, this would be my starting point. Okay? And there are many, and if you go back to the pyramid of Dr. Ashraf, there are things that you look at the fundamental level, and again at the very end, things like celebration, networking, doing network, all these are very important, but you have to do foundation.
No, it's okay. I can do it. I was just discussing this with Ryan. What you were talking about is great, and I like it very much. We have a thing, and people may agree with me or not, a main issue with our company's size. This applies very well to what we call small and medium, starting from 100 employees. So we talk about most of the current companies in the ICT sector, they are mostly in the under 50 employees. And it would be great if we are able to see most of the models, the process, etc., applied to gear more towards those smaller size that are not totally innovation companies. Because I was saying this, SoftBank, for example, is an innovation company by nature. Okay? It can be totally geared towards that. My company is 80 employees. I cannot really spare an innovation officer from a post to that. So how would it work? How would I normally start having my processes, innovation, etc., with the leadership, with maintenance? How would we do it properly in order to gradually have this innovation arm within, especially for companies that are under 50?
I want to say two things about this. The innovation platform that I just showed you right now, this is a platform that was targeting SMEs. And the initial SMEs in Europe was under 500. Okay? Now, if you look, however, at the breakdown of the 5,000 companies that I was just telling you about, you'll find that the vast majority are under 50 in Europe. Okay? So what I'm saying is that when they developed this type of platform and they looked into, here are the metrics that I would like to look into, right, for these small companies. This is what they stand. So what I'm saying that this will be actually very well applicable to companies under 50. Actually, there were companies that are under 10 that were using this platform. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, you say that you cannot afford to have an innovation manager, right? Are you talking about from cost-wise? Like are you unable to pay his salary?
Yeah, let me just highlight. The point is, you have two types of companies existing. Some companies that are already by nature from the start innovation focused. They are about building new products, new services, so they would fit properly into the model. But most of the companies we have seen, and this is why they are not growing much faster, and they are not geared toward innovation. They are operation oriented. Okay. How would we adjust those operation oriented to integrate the innovation smoothly and effectively?
It depends on the company at the end. And one thing that I want to tell you that this platform, for example, as long as the company has operations, then this thing will work. That's number one. Whether the company is, as you say, focusing towards delivering the innovation or not, that's a different story. So whether they have operations, then this is going to work. It depends on the company. You can have a company that is working as like a call center, or customers to call into, right? Something like that. The scope under which I can play with and the scope under which I can be creative, of course, is very limited. It's difficult for me to answer your every company will have a different scope under which it can change. Some companies, I can tell you, for example, that some of the companies that I work with in Smart Village, although that they were getting their strategy from Barrow, okay, as in terms of here's the kind of areas that I would like you to work on, right? Nevertheless, there were things inside that have been done from a culture point of view, from a structure point of view, from the way that people, the way that the senior management communicates with the lower people. This is all of this process innovation. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that it's really dependent on the kind of company that you're talking about. Yani,
it's okay. I think the main issue is maybe the communication barrier. How would I give this presentation to the existing SME or digital, and they can really acquire out of it one way forward or another, and then go into a planned approach to change.
This presentation is an eye-opener. That's all it is. I will not. Yeah, this is just an eye-opener. And there are many things that is still under other than what I was getting here. And what I want to say is that. Sorry, I lost track. Okay, sure. That's why we have.
The main problem is bridging the gap in order to get the low-hanging fruits quickly. When I was looking at the presentation, it reminds me of GoIT. GoIT is a nice program that had been conducted, still to be continued, but not a lot of the SMEs have been able to foresee the result of the good result.
That's why if you look at the three phases that we look at, we need to understand what the company has right now. We have to understand what are the problems that impact the company, and then we do the strategy and road mapping to understand how can we be different. In the three phases that I was talking to you about, this is the اختراع. It's not something that I created. This is the typical way that you would assess and you identify how the company needs to grow. So I would actually apply this three-phase platform, right, or three-phase methodology to any company in order to give them insight how to grow. With that, and this is what we have done. Actually, this is exactly what this is the process by which we get this organization.
Just to comment on the question, I just want to emphasize some points. First, that innovation is not dependent on the number of people involved in the process. We've seen teams of 5 persons creating very superior products, beating large corporations. Second, it's fine for executives to understand that their employees have much more capabilities than they imagine they have. If you hire someone to do a specific product for you, you are actually giving away the rest of the capability and the competency that this employee has, and because you are not employing knowledge management procedures in your company, you are actually losing the skills and the competitive edge you can bring to your company. So actually all these concepts in the presentation are applicable to companies even 10 employees or 50 employees, not maybe at the same scale, but the core concepts themselves are applicable. It's time to
yeah, there are certain metrics that you cannot apply that you must have your operations. Things like about how people communicate, how do they come up with new ideas. That by itself can be it's not very dependent on how people the process.
The last point is that about the low-hanging fruits. If the company is established just to catch the low-hanging fruits, this company has to realize that time will come when these tools are extinct, and if they don't innovate a new horizon for their business, they will die. So the core message in the reputation innovation is a very rare message. If companies keep only doing what they are currently doing, and not trying to look in the future after 3 or 5 years what we will be selling to the market, in which business model, this company will sure cease to exist, and very small teams will come to take the new market from.